Hey guys, I am back with yet another video. I know it's been a while, but this video is going to be a full breakdown of my track, A Place Like Home with Meg Mays. The track was just recently released on Melodic Basement Records, so I wanted to do a quick little breakdown video for you guys. This will be a bit of a longer video, so I will be putting timestamps down in the description below so you guys can jump around to any sections that you're the most interested in. So without further ado, let's get into the track. So starting off with the intro and the verse, I am just starting off the track with this guitar loop from Splice, which sounded like this. So that was the loop as I got it, and I just did a bit of post processing on it to get it to sound a bit more how I wanted it to. So I started off with a stereo imager, the CLA 2A just doing a bit of very light compression. I then sculpted it with an EQ and then some reverb and delay. So that was the starting point for the track. And then moving on from that, I also have this very plucky lead, which I made in Serum. The lead is just a square wave with 5 voices of unison and a sine wave with 7 and the MG low 12 filter with a high resonance and automation of the cutoff using the envelope. As for the effects, I'm just using tube distortion, compression, and some EQ to cut off some of the lows. And for post processing, I just have a resonator to accentuate the root of the song being C, and then an EQ to sculpt it a bit more, take out some of the high end, multi-band compression to tame the 2 to 6K range, and then smooth operator to tame any other resonances that I might have missed, and then delay and reverb again. And this is what it all sounded like. So that was the main lead. And then after that, I added a respace. The respace, it's just two saw waves, one with 16 voices unison, one with only a single voice, and then the MG Low 12 filter, and then some distortion, compression, hyperdimension, and another filter. And then I added my signature respace slides that I use in basically all of my tracks. And those three things together sound like this. Moving on into the verse, I added a glockenspiel, which is just playing the note G over and over. And then I have OTT, some reverb, and an auto pan on this just to give it some movement in the stereo space. Additionally, I also have this very classy sounding piano, which, if we look at the effects section for the piano, it's just three resonators making a chord of C minor and then some delay. So all those two together with the guitar, the Reese, and the plucks. And then as the last part of the melodic section is with the plucked chords that I have going, which it also has some reverb automation to give it a swelly, pulsating feel, and then it has this MG Load 12 filter to give it a bit of resonant character. And then lastly is the lead section. So for the leads, I am layering 3 different leads. I am layering this lead from Splice called Pluck Fire, and then I'm layering this other one. I forget where I got this. I think this one might have been sent to me from one of my friends, and it's called Pluck Crushed Emotion. And then lastly is this lead that I made, which it is in a similar vein to the plucks that I made, just without the voices of unison. And I did some cutting off of the high end with the MG low 24 of the square wave. And then I have hyper, distortion, compression, delay, and reverb. And that's what that sounds like. So all of the melodics together sounds a bit like this. Moving on from the melodic section of the verses, we can go into the drums. I know a lot of people have some mixed opinions on the drum choices that I used, but I, for this track, wanted something a bit in the middle of like heavy and soft. I didn't want anything too heavy, but I didn't want anything too soft either. And the drums that I used were, in my opinion, the best fit for this. Most of the drums in this section are from the Leviathan 2 pack by Black Octopus. And then other drums I am using are sampled from the free plugin MT Power Drum Kit. So going into the drums, we have this. So starting off with the kick and the snare, I'm using the kick and snare from Leviathan 2. And then I also have one of the sampled drums from MT Power Drum Kit, every second snare, but I have it slightly before the Leviathan 2 snare, just to give it a more slappy feel to it, I guess. So that's what that sounds like. And then I took that same snare from MT Power Drum Kit and I reverse it ev- on every other snare as well. So the first and the third snare. As for the auxiliary percussion, I took 2 samples from the Leviathan 2 pack and then sampled toms from MT Power Drum Kit. That way I have a nice cross between electronic and acoustic auxiliary percussions. So all of those. And in the context of the rest of the drums. And then the hi-hat pattern is pretty straightforward as well, using a hi-hat from Leviathan 2 one more time. And as for the processing, it's just an auto panner and some compression using RComp from Waves. The auto panning is rather light, only at 35%. So it's not super overbearing, but it still has a bit of play in the stereo field. And then as for processing on all of the other drums, all of the tracks are empty except for the one snare that I sampled from Empty Power Drum Kit, just cutting off some low end and boosting some of the highs. The main processing for this comes on the drum bus, where I did some pretty heavy compression using the CLA 3A from Waves. And that is where I got my drum sound from. As for that, that's pretty much how I went about my drums. Moving on, still on the verse section, I have lots of effects and whatnot going on. So to start off the track in the intro, I have a downlifter. I don't know when or why I started putting downlifters at the start of my tracks, but it's just became a thing that I do. I have a fair bit of risers. I just took the tail end of my riser 3 from my Essentials of MiSFiT Volume 1 pack. I took the tail end of that and I reversed it into itself to make it sound like this. And then I have that repeating every now and again. And then going into where the drums cut out, I have another riser another downlifter coming in after the riser. The main effects come in during the build-up, where the drums that I had in the verses cut out, and I switched to a build-up loop and some more heavier effect usage. So coming out of the verse, we have this riser from Leviathan 2. Going into several impacts, which are heard here. So the impacts are one from Ace Aura, one from the from the Essentials of MiSFiT, and then one from Leviathan 2. Together, once again, they sound like this. And then for the effects, it for the risers, that is, sorry, it's just my riser 3 that I mentioned earlier, a cashmere riser, and another riser from Black Octopus, and then this chime riser from the Chime and Asora melodic rhythm pack. And that's pretty much all of the risers in the track. And then additional ambiances that I have in this section, I took my guitar, I played a harmonic on the note C, and I just put auto tune on it, com- some compression, and then a reverb, which I ended up freezing the reverb to kind of have a tonal ambience in the background. So that I have that going on in the background, and then in the build-up, I also took the metronome from Ableton. And I put some resonators on it to make the C minor chord, and then I put delay and reverb and I'm automating the mix of the reverb. So that's pretty much it for my effects section for the verses. And the last thing to talk about is the vocals. So the vocals I have starting at measure 17, and I am sidechaining the vocals to themselves so I can have the reverb not be super overbearing while still being present. So for the main vocal track, it I just have some auto tune, vocal writer from Waves, automating the level of that. The Neve 1073 preamp just to add some top end to it. Then I'm using the UAD 1176 Bluey to add some compression. I'm using F6 to sculpt it a bit. NS1 from Waves to act as a noise suppressor as there was some background noise in the recording that was sent to me. The UAD LA2A to add some additional compression, and then a small amount of reverb just so the main vocal track does have some space. And then for the second track, I just have vocal bender to add some small formatting down, delay with a wet out of 50, and then I'm using the splitter to add two reverbs on a channel split. So one reverb on the left, one reverb on the right, and the two reverbs I decided to use are ROM and Valhalla Room, and they have near identical settings. And then I'm using Supercharger from Native Instruments to compress to do side chain compression to the original vocal track. And together those sound like this.
I let myself feel how I feel, even though life doesn't seem real. My memories replay in my head again, 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 again.
And altogether, the verse going into the build-up sounds like this.
I let myself feel how I feel, even though life doesn't seem real. My memories replay in my head again, 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 again. Surrounded by all of the noise, time travel back to the toys and smell of the noise. Yeah, in a place I call my own, a place where the walls are stone, and that's where I go. It's all that I know. It's a place like home.
One last thing to mention, I did add this magic bubble from the melodic rhythm pack that Chime and Azor did, just to add some additional texture to the build-up. And I'm automating a low pass on that. And then that's basically it for the verse and the build-up. So going into the drop, I'm going to start off with the sound design for the drop. Um, and then I'll go into the arrangement after that. So for the sound design, I have a handful of basses and some leads. So bass one, I'm layering two times, and it's the same exact layer, just one has resonators and the one is completely um, free of resonators. The reason I did that is so I could accentuate the dry version of it a bit more. That way, it's not super resonant. So here's how it sounds: the layer, and then the one with the resonators, and together. It's a very subtle change, but it is effective to me, in my opinion. And here's the patch. So it's just the squelchy 1 and 2 wavetables, and then a plucky LFO, and then for the effects, I'm using distortion, compression, EQ with two peaks that are getting automated by the LFO, and then hyper and some reverb, and it gives it this sound. And then with the resonators, I'm doing the same thing I've done with most of the resonators, is just three resonators making a chord. And then after that, I have some OTT, saturation knob, and F6, which I'm just using to cut off some of the low end of it. And together, like I said, they sound like this. And then this second bass, I made it after I decided that I wanted to use some samples from the melodic rhythm pack in the track, just because I wanted all my basses to kind of sound uniform and as if they were meant to be for the track. So here's the bass that inspired me to remake some of the basses that I originally had. And this is one of Chime's bass loops from the melodic rhythm pack. And I then took some time to make some other basses, being bass 2 primarily. And the patch for this looks like this. It's just the phase verb and the solid phase 2 wavetables. And then I'm on automating with LFO1 the wavetable position on both of them. I'm automating the mirror on the phase verb. And then I have the high 24 filter with some resonance, and I'm automating the resonance in the cutoff. As for the effects, just hyper distortion, asim distortion, that is, with the drive and the mix getting automated, compression, and some EQ, and together it all makes it sound like this. And then for post processing, I have OTT, a resonator, Ravage distortion from Soundspot, another OTT, and then F6 again to cut off some of the low end. So without the post processing, it sounds like this. And then with the post processing, it's like this. And then moving on to bass 3, which I believe I use in the second drop. So I'll go over to that real quick. It's just a kind of weird growly sound that I ended up making using the squelchy one and the squelchy FM one. And then I'm modulating the FM from sub, and I'm using a square wave for the sub on at squelchy FM1 oscillator B. And then I have a really weird LFO shape, which I don't even remember making it like this, but it works. And then the effects are pretty much the same as they have been for a lot of my other basses. Hyper hyper dimension, distortion, compression, and then EQ, a phaser, which I added. Here's what it sounds like without the phaser. And then the phase 48 plus filter, which it's just automating the cutoff of it. And then post processing, OTT, and some stereo imaging. And that's basically that bass. So my favorite sound in this was this Galaxy ARP. So for this, it's just my mid bass preset, which is in my Essentials of MiSFiT Volume 1 pack. And then the main sound came from Ovox, but I did put a resonator beforehand. And then I'm using Ovox with the Galaxy ARP preset, which can be found under the synth section. And then I believe I messed with the tune of Ovox 1 a little bit. And then I it turned from into, and then I have F6 to sculpt it a little bit, and then I have delay and reverb, and I am automating the mix of the reverb, so it isn't a constant reverb effect. It kind of has a swellier, swell. I guess that's a word now. A more swelled feeling to it, and then obviously, like I said, I am using this chime loop, and I just added some OTT to that. Um, I also have this other chime loop, and then I have some plucks going on to fill up some space. The plucks are just square waves, if I'm remembering correctly, and then I use the MG Low 12 with a higher resonance, add some resonant texture to it, as well as a saturation knob on the post processing side of things. As for the main bass, I'm layering the main bass twice. The first layer sounds like this, and for this, it's just the trilobite 2 and a square wave, and I'm FMing oscillator A into from B, and then I have the high 24 filter, some distortion, compression, EQ, and I'm using the phase 48 filter one more time. And then for post processing, I did 3 resonators, one being on the stereo track, and then I did the channel split again with the other 2 resonators, and then just to tame some of the high frequencies that the resonators were creating, I added smooth operators to just tame them a bit, and I turned the focus all the way up. That way, it's more focused on the resonances rather than more wideband with how it would be with a lower focus. And then F6 again, just to clear up some room for the sub. And then the post processing for the second layer of the main bass is the exact same as before, but the patch is very different. It's a pulse wave, which is getting FM'd from noise, and then I have the Monster 3 wavetable getting FM from A, and no filter this time. As for the effects, it's just hyper, distortion, compression, and some reverb. And then I have a sub, which I'm automating the sub. And then the sub does have a bit of distortion, and then I'm cutting off the the EQ with I'm cutting it off with an EQ at 150 hertz, just so it's not super high harmonics coming from the sub, because otherwise it'll sound like this, or rather than. So very subtle, but it does make an impact to it. And then I have a mid bass layer, which for this I just took my mid bass and I automated the levels of it, and then I took an EQ and I just wanted only the mid range, so I cut it at 100 hertz and then I cut it at 4,000 hertz. So it and the sub in the mid bass, and then with the main basses, it sounds like this. Additional effects that I have going on are I have this Ace Aura bass loop, which I pitched down because the original loop was in F minor, but I am working in the key of C minor, so I pitched it down, and I added resonators just so it sounded a bit more natural since it did sound kind of weird pitched that far down. And then F6 cutting off some low end again, and then some reverb. And I'm automating the mix of the reverb so it has a swelly feel in the background as well. And then that's it for the first drop, all of the layers that I use. So together, the drop sounds like this. And then for the drums of the drop, I'm using Ace Aura's kick, two s- two kicks, two snares, sorry, one from Chime, and then one from Sharks, and then using one of my hi hats, a drop crash that I found from Splice, and then I do this alternating ride thing in a polyrhythmic type of style. One ride being from Crusaders trap EDM, and then one being from um, Black Octopus Leviathan 2 again. So that's basically my main drum sound for this track, and it sounds like this. So, like I said, I'm using an Ace Aura kick and a chime and Sharks crash. And the hi hat pattern, it's just a steady groove, a steady eighth note groove. But the main appeal for the drums is in this ride pattern. I have two rides, and then I have them both getting panned separate ways using auto panners. That way, they're in separate ears at the same time, and then come together in the middle every 2 bars or every 1 bar, I guess rather. So those together sound like this. As for other processing on the drums, it's not much. I also have a slight auto pan on the pan, uh, a slight auto pan on the hi hats, with a lower mix than it is on the rides, only 55%. So it's not uh, super abrasive in the stereo field, but it still is playing with it a little bit. And then I'm just cutting off some low end from the snares, and then I have a transient shaper on the kick. As for bus processing, I'm using the CLA 3A again on the drum bus just to tighten everything up and glue everything together. And it sounds like this in for the entire drop. Other additional effects that I have in the drop is I took the tail end of my Misfit Riser 3 and I just made it just repeat every bar like this. And then I also have some background ambience. I took the Chimes choir and I automated the freeze of a reverb so I could get a nice reverb freeze in the background as well. And then I took this ambience which I downloaded from Splice and threw it in the background as well, panned hard left. And then that's basically it for the background ambiances of the drop. It's pretty straightforward in that regard. And yeah, that's basically how I made the first drop for the arrangement. I just I wanted the main focus to be the bass one and the main bass. So I kind of plugged and placed some various elements in between where I wanted those two elements to sit, and I utilized the Galaxy ARP and the chime bass fills to fill out the space that those two basses weren't occupying. Going into the next section, the break, it's pretty straightforward. I'm taking the chords that were played on the guitar loop and I transferred them over to a piano and choir. Piano, I also added a lot of the other lead lines from the plucky lead that I had. And then I have this choir. And then I also played some guitar on here. And for the processing on the guitar, I'm just using Archetype Plini and a patch that I made a while ago called Ethereal Aether. I have it set to mono, um, and that's basically the entirety of the patch. For that, I usually play it in stereo, but for the context of this, I wanted it in mono just so it's not competing for space in the stereo field. I repeated that glass piano sound earlier. And then I introduced the respace with a filter halfway through the break. And then I took my drop elements and I have them still playing in the background, but they have a lot of the high end content filtered out. And then all together, they make this. As for background ambiances, just impacts coming out of the drop, downlifter, and then I have some risers in the background. Same risers I've been using, just playing in the background. As you can see, I have the riser 3 that I used twice in this track on two separate tracks. The second one, it's just with an added delay, and it sounds like this. Just to add some added texture and ear candy to the background. But I'm not using any more ambiances for the break section other than those ones. Going into the verse, it's pretty much the same exact concept as the first verse, just without the drums. and the piano is sticking around after the break.
The story.
One thing that I also did for this section is I cut up the plucky lead lines that I had just to make room for the piano, so that way it wasn't all on one instrument. Um, Rather than changing the melody, I just kind of wanted to play with where the same melody was playing. So I cut it up so that so just some small cuts here and there to kind of add some small variation to it while still keeping the same lead line. I still have all of the other elements exactly the same. And then I also have a pad in the build-up this time. This pad, it's just two saw waves and a square wave with a filter, um, some distortion and compression, another filter, and reverb. And it's just playing in the background. It's also playing in the break as well. Oops. And I am using Filter Step from, I believe, Audio Modern is the name of the company. Is a free plugin, really creatively inspiring, and I'm just using it to add some filter movement to it to add some additional variation to the build-up. And in the context of the build-up, it sounds like this. And then the second drop is uses a lot of the same elements that I showed in the first drop, but I decided to go with more of a melodic drop for this. So I added some future bass style chords, some leads, and um, still have the modulation in the bass lines as well. So I have these chord stacks layered with the leads. So the chords from top to bottom, I have this preset that I named Daddy Issues. I have another one that I often pair with that one called Bussin' Facts. Fun story about um, these two presets. I'm actually good friends with Meg Mays in real life, and she sent me a video of her and her family out to dinner that she made for TikTok, and I resampled that video into um, these presets, and they've been my main presets for basically all of my tracks ever since I made them, just because I like using them so much. And then I took another chord preset. I think I made this one from scratch. Yep, it's just a square wave, and I put an arpeggiator on it, and it sounds like. And I have some EQ, compression, and reverb on that. And then I have another chord preset, which is a pulse wave and a square wave, and I'm FMing the square wave to the pulse wave. I have phaser, compression, and reverb, and then I am basically just looking for the mid frequencies of this. So I put a bandpass filter on it with Pro Q3 and some stereo widening on it as well to give it more stereo texture. So this is the 3 chord presets. Additionally, I often use a choir and a dance piano in my drops. And then for the bases of the chord stack, I have this bass. I made a very new bass for this with the squelchy FM1 and a square wave and the phase 24 filter. And then hyperdimension, diode 1 distortion and some compression. So these two basses together. And then a Vocaloid bass from Steve Aoki that is available on Splice. And then a sub. And that's basically my entire chord stack. The leads, I am layering 4 leads. For the leads, it is just this lead with the PWM on a square wave and the mirror on a on the init wavetable. I think that's what that is. And then the second lead is a square wave with 16 voices and a saw wave with 5. And I'm taking out the high end and adding some resonance with the high 24. And then distortion, compression, phaser, delay, and reverb. And then 2 square waves to add a plucky lead in the background. And then this last lead is a square with 11 and a saw with 16 voices of unison and distortion and compression with delay and reverb as well. And as for the arrangement, it's pretty simple. Similar to the first drop, I wanted the main focus to be the bass 1 and the main bass, but I also wanted to add some focus on the melodic chords. And I added plucks to complement everything and just used all of the other basses that I've designed and downloaded from Splice to complement everything in the background. So this is what second drop sounds like. And then for the second section, I just wanted a calmer, future bassy kind of section. So I just used the chords that I've played, all sustained, and I've replicated the lead that I'm using for the verses. And I'm automating the main bass in the background just on a triplet groove to add some additional background. And I called that the metal 8 in the project, but it's basically just a cooldown. And then it goes right back in to what was the first drop to bring it all full circle. So that was the second drop. For the drums, pretty similar drum groove, if not the exact same drum groove from before, but in the middle 8, I just cut out the kicks and I added a new snare. This snare is a new snare that I made, um, which will be in an upcoming pack that I'm still working on. And I'm layering that with the Sharks clap. And then I have in the background this Leviathan 2 drum loop. And that was all of the drums for the middle eight. And then I used the AU5 fill to go back into the drop again. The reason I used the AU5 fill is because it sounds pretty similar, just a lot heavier to this fill in the Leviathan 2 drum loop. So that was the drums. Um, Ambiances are the same in the drop. I also added this chime pad in the background. I had this one ambience panned all the way left. I have the chime ambience panned all the way right. And then I also added some vocoded vocals in here. So I have my chords for that section down here, which the chords are just basic triads, actually basic seventh chords, and they're inversions. And then the vocoded vocals sound like this.
Place like it's a place like.
And then I'm also vocoding the vocals in that middle eight section.
And that's where I go. It's all that I know. It's a place like home.
And that's basically it for this track. Going into the outro, it's just the guitar. And yeah, that's the entirety of the track, from start to finish. Thank you guys for watching this video. You can find links to all of the sounds that I used in this track down in the description, and you can also find a link to the song for you guys to go check it out. So if you guys like this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.